Everyone for joining us as we launch our community engagement for our solid waste management master plan. Great to see people here tonight. My name is Phil Jensen. I'm a team member with the city's solid waste resources group, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all here tonight. There are several members of the city's team here listening to what people are talking about. And if you've had a chance to introduce yourself to some of them, that's great. And us to you, it's wonderful. As we begin the conversation about the future of waste management in Guelph. Over the next year, we'll be updating the city's waste management master plan. And tonight is the official kickoff of one of the most important aspects, and that's the aspect where we kick off the process of us listening to what you are telling us with respect to waste management in Guelph. And we will continue to consult through the process. What we hear from Guelph residents and what we turn up in our research will eventually be molded into recommendations for programs, policies, initiatives, things to move Guelph forward with respect to waste diversion, waste reduction, improvements to the waste management system, continuous improvement, that type of thing. Several weeks ago, we contacted our speaker to see if she would be willing to help us kick this process off, and you can imagine we were quite thrilled when she said yes. Many of you will appreciate this when I say it, but the closer we got to this date, the more I realized that our speaker was a kind of person who needed no introduction. However, I'm going to introduce her just the same. Dr. Saxe is one of the most accomplished individuals that I have ever met, and I'm sure many of us have ever met. And yet, I will tell you, her bio is as concise and modest as any I've ever seen, but I think it tells the whole story. Dr. Dianne Saxe is one of Canada's most respected environmental lawyers. She was Environmental Commissioner for the province of Ontario from 2015 to 2019. She was appointed unanimously by all MPPs to report to the legislature on Ontario's environment, energy, and climate performance, and to be the guardian of the Environmental Bill of Rights. She now heads Saxe Facts, providing strategic advice and information on climate, energy, and the environment. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Saxe.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me clearly at the back? Yes? Good, thank you. All right. Trevor, is it going to be possible for me to see my slides on one of the side pieces so I can tell what slide I'm on? No? Okay. Well, in that case, I'm moving the chair. I thought with three screens this was going to be simple. All right. So, I'm here to talk about waste and the climate crisis. Yes, I'm always talking about the climate crisis because it is the dominating challenge to our lives, and Phil asked me to talk about the climate crisis and how waste fits in. So I start, of course, by talking about the climate crisis. And you guys all know this, right? The climate emergency is here. Nobody needs me to tell you this. It's not just polar bears anymore. It's not just other people in other places later. It's affecting us now. Is it as bad as we think? It's actually quite a bit worse. So the basic mechanism, I hope you all know, but sometimes it helps to repeat. How does what we do, burning fossil fuels, changing the world? Because carbon dioxide is a very small part of the atmosphere. But what happens is it changes how the sun's heat escapes. So the sun shines as it always has, as it has for billions of years. And you can see on the left, the sun's heat comes to the Earth, and until we started burning all these fossil fuels, most of it went right back out to outer space. What carbon dioxide does, even at tiny concentrations, is it closes the windows where the heat used to get out. It's like putting hairs in the drain of your bathroom. Heat can't get out as fast, So it builds up and it builds up over time, and that's what we're doing. Now, a lot of time people say to me, well, what we do doesn't matter. Canada's a small country. Well, it's physically big, but there's only 37 million people. It's not about us, it's about all those other guys. But of the nearly 200 countries in the world, Canada's in the top 10 climate polluters, not just per capita, but in total. We have really big feet. So the result of all of this climate pollution, the greenhouse gases we've been putting into the atmosphere, is the world has a fever. We've been blowing away temperature records. Dark red is temperature records. We've been blowing away records for how many records we blow away. We've been blowing away records by how much we blow them away. All over the world, we're blowing away records. And there's only a few places you can see a little bit of blue on that drawing. Well, there's a few places that are cooler than average, but not many, and that's mostly where the ice caps are melting. So where is all the heat going? We've been trapping extra heat in the world for basically my whole lifetime. So where is it going? So if you look at the drawing on the left, those of you with really sharp eyes might see there's this tiny little red line at the bottom. Can you see that? So that's how much of the extra heat is in the air where we tend to notice it. People tend to think that the only thing that matters is what we notice, and that's only about 1% of the heat. So about 3% is in that green line that's in soil and vegetation. There's about 3% that's been warming up ice, and all the rest of it is in the water, mostly in the oceans. So 3 things happen when you warm up water, and I hope you learn them in grade 3. First thing is, warmer water takes up more space. What does that do to sea level? Does it matter if you believe in it? Okay, second thing. Any people here who fish? Okay, warmer water holds less oxygen. What does that mean for anything in the ocean that needs oxygen? And the third thing warming water does is a clue on the slide. Storms are heat engines. Where do storms get their ferocity, their power, their destructiveness? From the heat of the ocean. And we're heating the oceans. So my experience has been that when people get bad news, personal, financial, romantic, whatever, they tend to want to hang on for normal to come back. Remember the Beatles song Yesterday? Well, I see that wherever I go. People want to hold on and wait for normal to come back. And the most important thing I need to tell you is that normal can't come back. So what you see on this slide is just how temperature has already changed. What we mean by normal, people my age normally mean the average of the 20th century. That's also what our laws are designed for. It's what our infrastructure is designed for. It's what our insurance is designed for. It's what our crops are basically designed for. And the zero line, that's the average of the 20th century. And I hope you can see we don't live there anymore. And we know that it cannot come back because it takes about a generation between the time that we put climate pollution into the air and the time that it starts showing up on charts like this. So what we are experiencing in temperature is mostly the result of what we emitted a generation or more ago. And what's happened since then? It is a generation ago that we knew what burning fossil fuels was going to do. The governments of the entire world got together in 1992 to sign the first treaty about climate change, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, based on science in the 1980s. And all the countries of the world agreed that we would work together to keep average global heating to less than 2 degrees because we knew already that there would be enormous damage and destruction if we blew past 2 degrees. So that's 30 years ago. Well, 27 years ago. So we had all the science. We knew that basically our ability to grow food and many of the other foundations of modern society were at risk unless we reduced our pollution. So what did we do? Did it go up or did it go down? Who thinks up? So we have been putting climate pollution into the air faster and faster and faster. In the 30 years since the science was done, that was the basis for the treaty, we doubled the amount of climate pollution in the atmosphere. First, nearly 250 years, met it just in the next 30. And you can see that's how carbon dioxide is going up in the atmosphere, and you can see it's going up faster and faster. Every decade it's going up faster and faster. Now, some of you have heard of 350.org, I hope. So what's 350? Why 350? Anybody know?
Parts per million?
Yeah, 350 parts per million. It's the best guess that we have from science as to the highest level of carbon dioxide we can have for long and have a stable kind of world with mountain glaciers and coral reefs and the kind of weather in which modern agriculture evolved. And we blew past that in 1988, about a generation ago. And since then, we've been putting more pollution in the air every year, faster and faster. We pollute more per year now, about 2/3 more than we did in 1992. So you have to say, all right, we're way past 350. We're at 415. I'm from an evidence-based profession. How many people here are from evidence-based professions? Okay, a lot of great reasons to rely on evidence, but there's one big drawback. There's only one place to get evidence. It's what's happened already. So what happened to people last time carbon dioxide was this high? That's right, there weren't any people. So we're in completely uncharted territory, and we're going there faster and faster and faster. So even faster here in Canada, we're warming about 2 to 3 times as fast as the global average. So the world as a whole has warmed a little over 1 degree centigrade in a century and a half. In Ontario, we've warmed more than that just since 1948. We're on track to 2.5 and 4 degrees just in the next 30 years or so. But it's different in different places, so that's the other thing. This chart was prepared for me by mathematicians at York University. What it shows is how has the frost-free season changed in Ontario. And don't worry about the baby, we're actually talking about this for his or her future. Okay, well, that takes priority, absolutely. But anyway, at least you can see there are different colors in different parts of Ontario. You can see that much? So there are parts of Ontario, this is, again, only what's happened already. So in the last 4 decades, growing seasons in Ontario, there's places where they've changed 13 days a decade for 4 decades already, which is lightning speed if you're a tree or a moose. And those parts of Ontario that are marked in blue where we have seen no increase in growing season at all. So even though the climate crisis is global, it's created globally, it affects everybody, it doesn't affect everybody the same. So the point of that chart. On Toronto, we have, and I know nobody outside Toronto likes Toronto data, but we have more data for Toronto than we do for Guelph. And so we can look back and see how has temperature changed in Toronto for the last century and a half. When the world as a whole warmed a little over 1 degree, Toronto has warmed more than 3 degrees. Some of that's urban heat on in effect, we don't know exactly how much. What about precipitation? Has precipitation changed in Ontario in the last 4 decades? Clue on the slide. We have places that are drier in the summer than they used to be, but in the winter we're wetter. But as you can see, some places are a heck of a lot wetter than they used to be, and a lot of what used to come as snow now comes as rain or sleet or hail or grizzle or something else, which also has big consequences if you're a moose or infrastructure. Thunder Bay, for example, you can see they used to be able to count on getting below 0 in October and staying there till April. And now they've got fluctuations. Above and below 0 can happen all winter long, so their concrete's falling, their infrastructure's starting to fall apart, they're having to use a lot more salt. That causes soil contamination issues. They're having all sorts of issues they didn't think they were going to have. Now, everything I've talked to you about so far is about averages. Averages are important. They tell us a lot about the big picture, but they don't tell us a lot about the short term. So the old joke goes, if your head's in the oven and you have 3rd-degree burns, and your feet are in the freezer and you've got frostbite, On average, you are? On average, you're fine, but actually you need to go to the hospital. And it's the same thing for us. It's the extremes that do most of the damage in the short run. So how much of our extremes increase? Well, this is one of those places where we don't have really good data going back a century and a half. So if I go to those wild and crazy people, the insurance actuaries, they felt as far back as they could go as 1960. So compared to the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s, how much worse are climate extremes here now? They're 4 times as bad as they were when I was a young woman, which is not that long ago. And we see that showing up in all kinds of things. It's not a question of if anymore, it's a question of when, it's a question of where. These are all pictures from Ontario for the last couple of years. We can certainly see it in the insured losses. So this is from the Insurance Bureau of Canada, and they allowed me to have the data for insured weather losses just in Ontario. Can anybody see a trend? Now, there's no inflation in these figures. This is constant dollars. There's no wealth effect in these figures. This is adjusted for GDP. This is just true increases in constant dollars in insured losses in Ontario from extreme weather. Now, there's something else about this. You might notice that these colors on the left side of the slide are different from the right side of the slide. So that's because the data source changed. Until 2007, the Insurance Bureau reported all of the insured losses from extreme weather. Since 2008, they only report what they call catastrophic extreme weather losses, meaning each individual event has to cost more than $25 million. So if we had comparable data, how much faster would that line be going up? We don't know. I don't know how much faster, but it would be faster. Now, another thing about this slide, this only shows you what the insurance companies are paying out. Are there any other losses? I mean, there are a lot of individuals who don't have insurance, and who does that tend to be? Is it the rich who tend to go without insurance? And the Insurance Bureau also reported in March that their best estimate is that for every billion they pay out, the public sector is losing $3 billion, usually in infrastructure damage, often that doesn't get repaired. So, who thinks this might affect the cost of insurance? Does anybody think this might affect the availability of insurance? Does anybody think this might affect who has insurance? A lot about the climate crisis exacerbates inequality. The poor and the most vulnerable always suffer the most. This isn't one of the ways that's going to happen. Insurance is getting more expensive. Insurance is going to be less available for people in vulnerable areas. Many places, the people who live in the vulnerable areas are the same people who can't afford the insurance. And all of that's just what's happened already. So what's ahead? Well, Greta's right. Our world's on fire. And one of the challenges we have with understanding all of this is a lot of the official reports talk about 2100. I have never met a politician who gives a damn about 2100. Because they do not expect to be in power. They don't expect to be alive in 2100. But that baby will only be 81 in 2100. Anybody here have some small person you care about? I'm very fond of these two, even though they're really noisy. I'm going to do a few days babysitting this week. We'll see how that goes. But, you know, if they have the kind of life expectancy we have, they will be living the storms, the horrors that the reports are telling us about. We're not just now talking about future generations, we're talking about changes that will occur to those of us alive today, many of you here. So we are getting to know quite a bit more about what's happening. And in 1992, when all the governments of the world agreed to the treaty, they recognized that it was going to be really essential to have good, reliable science that every government could rely upon. And so they set up the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. You've heard of the IPCC. Well, that's what they are. This is the best scientists in the world being organized by all the governments in the world to provide the most reliable science possible that everyone can agree to. So if anybody ever says to you they don't know who to believe, There is a really clear answer. This is who you believe. This is the largest scientific collaboration in human history, the best of my knowledge. It is the best answer we've got. Their main job is to put together these big reports that come out every 8 years or so to say, okay, what's going the state of the science, and they're huge and devastating and complicated. But the IPCC was asked also to do 3 special reports, which have come out in the last year, and each one is more horrifying than the one before. Really driving home that we are in deep trouble, which we have created, and it's going to get a lot worse fast. So these are the 3 reports. The first one is this question of how hot does it have to get before we start having a lot of damage? So I mentioned a few minutes ago, oh, thank you, that the treaty says where all countries are going to work together to keep the temperature below 2 degrees of warming. But it became more and more obvious that it's not safe to go to 2 degrees, that a lot of bad things will happen before we get to 2 degrees. And so the IPCC was asked, how much worse will 2 degrees be than 1.5 degrees of warming? And the answer was a lot. Large, widespread, robust differences in all kinds of things that we really care about. But the biggest single difference is this question of what can we adapt and cope with? If we could keep the warming below 1.5 degrees, the best science we have is that most natural and human systems will be able to adapt. It may be expensive, it may be disruptive, but most human and natural systems will not collapse if we can stay below 1.5 degrees. If we go to 2 degrees, the ability of human and natural systems to adapt starts to disappear. So, 2 degrees, a lot worse than 1.5. Second report came out this summer talking about land and food. Bottom line of this report is that the climate crisis has already adversely affected the nutritional value of food, the security of food, and that, again, we're at a pivot point. If we get smart, we could do a lot to recover damaged land, to increase our resilience, to be able to continue to grow food. And a big part of that, a huge part of that, is reducing our use of fossil fuels and concentrating on restoration of soils. But if we don't do that, and if we blow past 1.5 degrees, we're at high risk. If we blow past 2 degrees, we're at very high risk of some things you probably don't want. Food supplies. We had another report just come out this week showing that the way the jet stream has been changed already by the climate crisis can lock in hot weather events in multiple parts of the world at the same time, which can lead to multiple simultaneous crop failures of food crops. Because already a lot of the food crops we depend on are near their temperature limits. Corn, for example, if it's over, I think it's 104 degrees Fahrenheit for more than 4 days during the silking, it may not set any grains at all. And a lot of areas that now grow corn get very close to those temperatures already. We can expect, if we go past 2 degrees, rapid declines in agricultural productivity, particularly in hotter areas. We can expect widespread and irreversible damage to land and ecosystems, and we can expect an awful lot of people on the move, as well as, of course, much more wildfire. And then the third report, if that wasn't bad enough, looked at the oceans. So the oceans are in crisis. The combination of the extra heat, because the oceans have absorbed most of the heat we've trapped, and the acidification. So carbon dioxide dissolves right into the oceans and it turns into carbonic acid. It changes the pH of the oceans. And that makes it hard for anything in the ocean that has to make a skeleton. They do it by pulling calcium ions out of solution, and you change the pH, you make that harder. So we can expect, well, the oceans are already in crisis. We're heading towards much faster rises in sea level. We're heading towards changes in how the atmospheric rivers move around the world. It means more floods, more droughts, probably displacing hundreds of millions of people. And then, because this report documented more precisely sea level rise, Another report then went back and used LIDAR to more accurately compare ground level data from around the world to what we now know sea level will be. And the conclusion was, in the next 3 decades, anybody want to guess how many people's homes will be underwater at high tide? Anybody want to guess? In the next 3 decades? Best guess was 150 to 300 million people's homes will be underwater at high tide. How often does high tide come? Twice a day. Do you think they'll stay there? Do you think they'll see us here with our fresh water and ability to grow food and they're just going to leave us here in our splendid isolation? Nobody's going to want to come here, right? They're just going to stay where they are and die? That's not enough. I mean, our entire economy, our society, depends on a series of natural systems. And the living creatures of the world are a big part of those natural systems, and they are also in crisis. So in addition to the International Treaty on Climate, there's a parallel international treaty on what's called biodiversity, everything that lives except us. And they put out their massive assessment report of the state of all the natural systems in the world also this summer. And what they said is, it's in crisis. There's 1 million species already at serious risk, and the climate crisis is pushing more and more species to the brink. That's not enough. The World Health Organization also screaming, trying to get our attention to say, climate crisis is the biggest threat to public health this century. And for every dollar that we spend now reducing our use of fossil fuels, we would get $2 in health benefits. Vice versa, if we refuse to spend the money now, we're going to pay twice as much in health damage. You put all this together, and the clearest summary that we've had is a special report, special rapporteur to the United Nations Human Rights Council, who was clearer than most of the international reports are pretty mealy-mouthed. This guy was clear. He said, all right, we have now reached the stage where the best case we can expect during the lifetime of today's children is widespread death and suffering. That's the best case. And the worst case during the lifetime of today's children is humanity on the brink of extinction. And for people, there aren't any bigger stakes. And that's what we're doing. We can see other health effects. We can see Lyme disease. When I started giving climate talks, I would ask an audience, how many people here know someone personally who's had Lyme or West Nile disease? Well, how many here personally know someone? Everywhere I go now, it's about a third or a quarter of the audience, because the ticks don't get killed by the winter anymore. Winter used to do a lot of things for us. The LAMPS lab at York tells me that within 10 to 15 years, the mosquito that carries Zika will be established in Ontario. We've got infrastructure at risk. That happened in Halifax in September. The Council of Canadian Academies estimated an 85% chance that within the next 20 years we're going to have billions of dollars of infrastructure damage in Canada, or millions of people affected. We've got financial shocks being recognized by financial markets, including the Bank of Canada, and especially because we are more vulnerable because we're warming faster than average. And what else? And of course, Ontario is going pretty fast in the opposite direction. We had a lot to be proud of in Ontario until a year and a half ago. We don't know. There's a summary. So we really are at a point where we have to do both of these things. In 1992, at the Earth Summit, the conversation there was, well, should we mitigate, meaning reduce our pollution, or should we let our pollution rip and just adapt? It is now increasingly clear we no longer have a choice. We've increased our climate pollution so much we must do both. We must adapt because a great deal of additional change is unavoidable. We've already locked in a lot more change than what we've emitted already. And our economy is still mostly dependent on fossil fuels. It's going to take time to change it. But if we continue to increase our fossil fuel pollution, we will not be able to adapt. That's the one. So, I'm not saying there's no, this is one of the themes of the climate deniers. This is sort of their mantra. It's not real. Well, it is. It's not us. Yeah, it really is. It's not bad. Yes, it really is. The scientists can't be trusted. Well, I mean, who are you going to trust to tell you about science? The people who've devoted their lifetime to studying it, or the trolls on the internet? But this is the tough one, right? That there's no hope. Because there's a lot of reasons. There's a lot of objective evidence that we're in really deep trouble. But if the answer, the no hope is, says, well, what the hell? Don't bother trying. If we don't bother trying, there really is no hope. So there are still things we can do. If we want a 2-degree world, we can still physically get there, but it means we've got to be cutting today's pollution by a quarter in the next decade. That's during the working lifetime of the cars that are outside there and probably whatever's heating this building. If we want a 1.5-degree world, which is a pretty stable world, a lot like the world I grew up in, we've got to be cutting our climate pollution in half in the next 10 years. That means everything has to change. A lot of the changes will make things better, but we can't just continue and tinker. Tinkering will not work. It is too late for tinkering. So how close are we to 1.5 already? So what I'd like you to do is look and see how much of the room, the buffer to 1.5 degrees, has been used up in your personal lifetime. And that's just to 2017. So, we don't have much time left. We're in really big trouble. We've got things we have to do. So that takes me to waste. Now, I'm going to be really clear from the beginning. Waste is not the big story here. Waste is a small part of the story, but it is a part of the story. So you can see Ontario's historical waste emissions. They have gone up a little bit, not very much. But look and see, right? Waste is about 4% of Ontario's greenhouse gas emissions. The big one is, clue on the slide, big one's people driving around. So waste matters, but it's pretty small. So we know that a lot of people want to think that climate pollution is the fault of the big guys with the smokestacks. And as you can see, that this is just direct pollution from direct activities in Ontario. Industries are big, but individuals are bigger. In Ontario, most of the climate pollution comes from all of us. And it's mostly because of sprawl. Most Ontarians live in places, low-density suburbs, where they have to drive to get to work, to get to stores, to get to libraries, to get to schools. That's been done deliberately by building urban form the way we have for the last half century or so. And we are also glad to know who is number one in the world in driving the most climate-polluting cars. Number one in the entire world. Hands up, it's Canada. It takes a lot to beat the United States when it comes to, outright creating profitability, but we're it. There you go. We also truck a lot of stuff around. We've had decades of effort to make trucks a little cleaner, a little less polluting, and so you see we've got a tiny bit of improvement in efficiency, but we blew it all to hell because we truck so much more than we ever did before. Trucking is the only area of the Ontario economy where our emissions have doubled since 1990. So how big is waste in Guelph? Well, there you go. It's still 4%, pretty much standard. And this is just corporate emissions. I couldn't get any data for the city as a whole. Judging from other cities, generally the city government is about 2% roughly of the community emissions. So this is a pretty small piece of the pie. But anyway, this was the only data I could get for Guelph. Oh yes, and just look, right? What's the major source? Even for your city government, what's the major source of emissions? Driving stuff around. So, Now, the 4% admittedly doesn't cover everything. It does cover the methane from the landfill, which is most of the emissions, but the estimates of methane are highly unreliable. Probably covers the energy used to run the landfills. It doesn't cover the fuel in garbage trucks. It doesn't cover anybody driving to the landfill. It doesn't cover the staff driving, and it doesn't cover the key thing, is all of the energy and materials in the stuff that we buy and throw away. That's the big thing. So if we count everything, so the very last thing I did before I was turfed out of my office was we put out a document on the personal carbon footprint of individual Ontarians. And all of my reports are available on my website. You can still find them in the government site if you search hard enough, but they're very easy on smokestacks. But there we are. So for the average Ontarian, half of our emissions come from just 4 things. Number 1 is driving. Number 2 is? Number 3? Number 4? So half of our emissions come from that. That usually means for most people, the biggest opportunities to make significant reductions are on the 4 biggest things. It's hard to make big reductions on small things. But if we want to look and see, okay, what about everything else? Well, we do get maybe 1/6 of our emissions from the stuff we buy and throw away. And so waste does have a role, for sure, but it's still fairly small. So we need to do waste, but we can't just do waste. Okay? My bottom line, everybody okay with that? Methane is important, and the waste numbers undercount methane, if anybody's interested. It's officially counted as being roughly 25 times worse than carbon dioxide. It's actually about 100 times worse than carbon dioxide. Anybody really wants to know the numbers, I'll explain that afterwards. But this is an important resource, Project Drawdown. Is this new to anybody, Project Drawdown? Okay, most people know it. So a really great site, collating some of the best research in the world on what are the most cost-effective things we can do about reducing climate pollution. And 8 out of the top 20 are about food. And number 3 is reducing food waste. It doesn't mean handling it better when we throw it away. It's just not throwing away food. And so that's a really big thing, and I'm glad to see there's some interesting work being done here in Guelph about that. You know, food should not be garbage. The most important thing is to waste less. I saw that the University of Guelph group just got a $20,000 award just this week, I think, for an app to help people reduce food waste. But anyway, that's the number 1 thing, is don't waste food. And then when there is unavoidable surplus, number 1 thing is to feed people. Number 2 thing is to feed animals. The 3rd is to do something useful with it, either compost or anaerobic biodigestion, so you get the methane, use it for the, it should never, never, never go to. Now, we don't do that good a job here in Ontario, even though we've had recycling. We're all very proud of what wonderful recyclers we are. As you can see, we still send, as a province, more than half of our organic waste goes to landfill. Everything. And Guelph, I'm sure, is better than that average. This is Ontario-wide data, because that's what I had. And there's a lot of other reasons why you don't want organics in landfill. It's not just the climate problem. It contaminates groundwater. Anyway, you create this poisonous leachate when you get the combination of organics and metals and other kinds of things in there. And you're wasting a lot of other really good materials. So you should never have food in landfill. Now, there are no toilets on the bus. But food waste and, how shall I say this politely, human waste, do produce methane. Methane does not have to be a climate contaminant. It does not have to be creating ground level ozone and irritating our lungs. What else is methane? Right, natural gas is methane. And so if you're going to put your organic waste together without oxygen, generate methane, capture it and use it, you can run a bus with it. Okay, so there's only one Ontario municipality that I know of that is capturing the methane from poop and using it to run a bus. Anybody know where? It's Hamilton, but they're Canadians and they don't paint it on the bus, so this is a British picture. But they're there. So the other 72% of waste is not food waste. It's not as big a deal in terms of methane emissions, but it's still a problem just because we put so much into creating stuff that we throw out very fast. And so circular economy is one of the answers to that, and I did a report looking at these issues, and we do have a statute in Ontario called the Waste for Ontario Act, includes a circular economy section, but we're not doing anything about it at the moment. The big thing, of course, that we're with a lot of attention to plastics. I know your council's been looking at plastics. It's not that it has such a very large carbon footprint, although making plastic has some carbon footprint for sure. Plastic is basically an enormous problem because so much of it ends up as litter. It ends up it's ugly, but in water it's disastrous, right? It kills fish, kills whales, kills birds, kills all kinds of things. So glad to see that your council is looking at what to do about plastics. And the simple thing is, of course, not buying water in. Right, and I was delighted to see actual napkins back there, plates. And this is another thing, of course, is that so many people in Ontario believe that as long as they throw something in their blue box, whether it's the right thing or not, whether it's clean or not, then everything else they do is okay. It isn't so. So what can Guelph do? Well, the simplest thing any municipality can do, and any organization, is to have a carbon budget. You couldn't run a city government without a financial budget. You shouldn't be running a city government without a carbon budget. It is, in many ways, even more important. And it's the same process. You have to, first of all, know what you're spending now, which, and I was surprised. This is the only municipality I've spoken to this year that couldn't tell me what their community footprint was. I'm surprised for Guelph. Secondly, you've got to pick a target, which should be a science-based target. You've got to think about the 1.5 degrees. That's a much better rule. That means cutting in half in 10 years. Are you prepared to give up hundreds of millions of people on the move? Okay, well then maybe you only have to cut it by a quarter in 10 years, but you've got to do one or the other if you're going to say you're following science, which of course we're not yet. And then you have to go budget and plan to get there. So you have to start by knowing what your footprint is. Very old story, right? You can't manage what you don't measure. And I could go into lots of details of this if anybody wants. And then you have to have science-based targets. And we see more and more municipalities and countries now getting ambitious about their targets and recognizing that the climate crisis is a challenge. It's going to mean really bad things, but it also can be a kick in the butt that can take us to very good things. That there's a lot of opportunities to have better lives in a cleaner economy where you don't spend 2 hours a day driving, where maybe eat food that your neighbors grow. So there's places like Boston, set your targets, and then you need short-term targets and long-term targets. And one of the classic greenwashing tactics is say, oh, we're going to be marvelous in 2050, with no targets, no budget in between. Well, everybody expects to be gone by the time they get up to account. So no one can make real progress unless there are constraints that actually force hard trade-offs now. So there are hard trade-offs, just as there are with the financial budget. And then you've got to, like any other plan, you have to have trade-offs, you have to have discipline, there has to be accountability, and you're not going to have that unless you have a real budget. It has to be balanced every year. So, and there needs to be a climate lens on every decision. It isn't just a nice to have anymore. It's not just an add-on. And I started my career in the public service in 1974. And by and large, environment was always a nice to have if we have some spare time and money. We've got the important things to do first, and then maybe we'll get to environment. And so once in a while you get a little bit of environmental stuff, but you don't get actual big changes because it's always second. It can't be secondary anymore. We are in a collision with physics. In a collision with physics, physics wins. And that's where we're at. So every decision matters. And one of the things that we really have to come to grips with is that continuing to do what we're used to doing is making things worse. The old joke was, if you want to get out of a hole, if you want to fill in a hole, the first thing you have to do is stop digging, right? Every new subdivision is digging. Every new fossil fuel vehicle is digging. Every new building connected to natural gas is digging. Making it harder to change the direction we need to change. And that's where it has to start right now, because we're almost out of time. That's why I dragged you through all that science first, to say, yeah, this really is urgent. It's no longer something that can just be. Throughout most of my career, climate was something that people were going to get to when there was time. After we deal with this emergency, we'll get to it. Well, in the 45 years of my legal career, every significant decision maker I ever knew always had a desk full of emergencies. They never run out of emergencies. So they never got to the big things that are coming, so that now it is a emergency. So maybe now we'll get on the list. So what other municipalities do? Well, there's quite a few that have got plans. Vancouver was one of the first to adopt a climate emergency declaration and to adopt, they instructed their staff to come back with a detailed plan. The plan came back to council. They approved the plan. They've committed to change how they budget. And there's 6 big targets to achieve between 2025 and 2030 that, for example, 2/3 of every trip in the city will be either on foot or on bicycle or on transit. That 90% of people will live, everybody will live where 90% of what they need will be within walking distance. 50% of the vehicles on the street in 10 years will be zero-emission vehicles. These are not easy things to achieve. They recognize that they want to have a future. Vancouver, it's at sea level, right? It was listed in one of the lists we looked at. It was the 11th most vulnerable major city in the world in terms of financial impacts because the sea's rising. The carbon neutral cities, this is their Gamechanger list, and one of them is about waste, that we should have a ban. There should not be any more organic waste going into landfill, but it shouldn't be wasted. It needs to, we should be capturing the methane and using it to displace diesel, but also then, after you capture the methane, you've got really good material after that should go back into the soil, because we need to restore soils, we need to grow more things. So yes, this was, I did report on this a couple of years ago. We shouldn't have any more organics in landfill. It is, of course, most important to first reduce the amount of food we waste. We don't waste so much food in the first place, but then whatever we have shouldn't go to landfill. And but waste reduction isn't enough. I mean, you're talking about 4%. So if you're serious about having a future, we all have to be looking at the big things, not just the little things. And there we go. What are the big ones? Number 1 is land use. Land use is Ontario's oil sands. It is what is driving, it's the largest single factor driving our emissions. Any municipality that pretends to care about the climate crisis, that isn't getting serious about changing land use patterns, they're not serious about the issue. We should not have any further urban boundary expansions. We should not put any more suburbs in agricultural land. We need the agricultural land to grow food. We've got lots of room within urban boundaries to put people, and that doesn't mean high rises. Transportation. So this is a story that I like a lot. The city of Seville, a fairly small city, about 700,000 people in Spain, and they were going through a period of prosperity, and so more and more people were buying cars, and they were building more and more suburbs, and there were more and more people buying cars and driving cars, and what do you think they had as a result? They had gridlock, they had congestion, they had bad air pollution, they had a lot of people dying on the roads, and they decided to do something about it. So they had a survey, the new government came in and they did a survey, and they asked people, would you like a safe way to be able to bicycle around town? People said yes. So they did it. But there's only so much room on the roads. If you're going to make safe bike lanes, what do you have to take out? But then the key brilliant thing they did was they recognized just painting a stripe on the road doesn't really do very much. Drivers don't pay any attention to those stripes. Every day I'm forced out of the lane into the middle of traffic by cars. But cars do not usually drive up on the sidewalk. So they built I think you can see that in this picture, they built the bike lanes at the same level as the sidewalk. up a curb. And so that made them much safer. They had this huge rate of deaths. People cycling in the city were being mowed down at a huge rate. As soon as they made cycling safe in the city, an enormous upsurge in rides, and basically, I don't think I've got, I don't have the other slide here. They went basically nobody cycling to 70,000 trips a day. They built 180 kilometers of bike lanes for what would have cost them to build 6 kilometers of roads, and for a tiny fraction of what they paid on their public transit, and people love it. And it survived a change in government, partly because it was harder to take out, partly because lots of people use it every day and everybody. So we've got to make driving the less convenient option. It has to be something that's safe and convenient that we can do without carbon. And that can't be getting everybody an electric car. Electric cars are really useful. We can't replace every fossil fuel vehicle with electric car. Congestion will be just as bad, and we can't get that much lithium probably anyway. So got to have a way to make safe, convenient, zero carbon mobility for everybody, and that starts with land use, because you have to design the land use first to make it work. Buildings, very important. People love to talk about buildings. I looked at some of the plans that the city has put out, and a lot of them are about changing light bulbs. Changing light bulbs is great. What does changing light bulbs save? Money. How much does it save climate pollution? Generally nothing, because most of the time you use your lights at night. How much does our electricity system produce GHGs at night? No, we don't. By and large, we use nuclear, water, renewables at night. So LEDs are great for saving money. It's wonderful, but they're not going to be reducing your carbon footprint. Investments, really important what the city does with its money. It's harder to measure, but there's some estimates that in fact the climate impact of how the city invests your money could be as large as their fleet in terms of emissions. So really important, you should be demanding that they disclose the carbon footprint of your money. And if they're not divesting from fossil fuels, you can ask them why. Fossil fuel investments have tended to be really poor investments over the last decade, as well as destroying the world. There's renewable energy. There's more and more municipalities who've looked at... One of the things municipalities do is they own sites where people don't want to live. How many of you want to live over a sewage treatment plant? Landfill site? So what cities around the world have recognized is they're going to continue, people are probably going to still be going to the toilet for quite some time. Right? So they're going to keep needing a sewage treatment plant, but they're not going to be putting condos on top. So what could you put on top of a sewage treatment plant? Anybody have any ideas? Clue on the slide. And so you've got little towns like Raymond, Alberta. I never heard of Raymond, Alberta. They won a prize a few weeks ago for being a solar city in Alberta, because they recognize they have landfills, treatment plant, water treatment plant. They've got all this area that they could put solar on. And maybe you don't have the cash to do it. So Fayetteville, Arkansas, Arkansas is not generally considered the front line of climate action, but they recognize they could save a whole batch of money by putting solar on their wastewater treatment plant, but they didn't want to put up the money, so they made a three-way deal. There's lots of people who want to invest in green economy stuff because they know it's the future, so there was a funder happy to put up the money to build the panels, the developer put the panels in, the utility operates it, the city just gave their roof and signed a 20-year contract to buy the power back there. Do you think they're still going to be needing to treat sewage in 20 years? Probably. So that provided enough financial security for the developers to build it, and anyway, there you go. So lots of places to do that. So when it comes down to all of us, well, what can we all do at every level? Number one, we have to reduce our personal footprints. Personal, individuals, families, corporations, municipalities, everybody's got to reduce our own footprint. We're now up to, it's got to be 7% a year, because we've wasted so much time. The second thing is we've got to get ready for the crazier weather that's coming. But the third and the most important thing is to speak up. We have to speak up for collective action. The climate crisis cannot be solved by individual action. We need individual action, but it will not be enough. So, collective problems need collective action. That's what governments are invented for. Three big things we know, only three big things that really reduce pollution. Making polluters pay, that's what a carbon price is. Investing in solutions, that usually takes the carbon price to fund it. And regulations. So how do we speak up? How do we speak up effectively? So I want you to repeat back to me these 11 magic words that Ed Mabeck came up with. Simple, clear messages. Repeat it often. By a variety of trusted voices. That's how we change opinions. That's how we affect things that all of you are trusted voices in some circles. Anybody know what is the most trusted profession? It's not lawyers. Or politicians. Who do you think is the most trusted profession in the world?
Doctors.
Nurses. Right? But doctors are way up there too, and vets, and lots of other people. And anyone who is a trusted person needs to be speaking up in their language from the things that they know in the circles that you work in. Because people are more like, these are hard messages to hear. I wish this was not true. Every climate scientist in the world would get down and kiss the ground if this stuff were not true. These are hard messages. And so for people to hear hard messages, it's easier if it comes from someone who feels like me. It's easier for farmers to hear from farmers. It's easier for Baptists to hear from Baptists. So in whatever circles you work, how can you be a trusted voice? How can you encourage other people to be trusted voices in their circles? We need to build human bridges. So no one can do everything, but everyone could do something. Who would like to have some hope here? Well, this is the only formula I know. It's to start by looking the facts in the face, even though they're awful. But if we just stop there, it's a recipe for despair. The only way we turn it into hope is to find other people to take action with and to start right now. And I hope you will. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dianne. And wow. I think for a lot of us in the room, we are moving forward much better informed and much more motivated. So this has been a great talk for everyone in the room. At the risk of just taking, you know, when you say it takes one thing away from a presentation, obviously there's more than one thing here, but the one thing that stood out to me was near the end of the presentation, and that is the slide that says we need to speak up. And so, for those of us who are involved with the waste plan, for instance, this is what we hope people in the room will do. This is what we hope people in Guelph will do. And there's going to be a bit of time now in the next few months for people to do just that, and that's to speak up with respect to what vision they have for waste management in Guelph. We're going to be out, I think, as staff and as our consulting team with Dylan. We're going to be out working with individuals, working with various associations, you know, attending events, that type of thing, and also, you know, I draw people's attention to the website, and I also draw your attention to Have Your Say Guelph, where there'll be other requests for information, input, surveys, that kind of thing. This is the time in this planning process to speak up. So thanks very much, Dianne, for this great presentation.